All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. And with me today is someone who I booked on Zero so long ago. It's been way too long since, and I should have had him on this show earlier. But without further ado, Charles Eisenstein joins us here on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. He is a renegade as far as the topics he goes writing about, got him into a little hot water with the people that he maybe aligned himself with. I don't want to speak too much for him, but Charles, I think you're right at home here on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe even what happened, because if people don't know, you kind of had somewhat of a canceling not too long ago, huh?
Yeah. That happened in 2021 during the peak of the COVID hysteria. And part of the reason why I was canceled is simply for the very reason of calling it a hysteria and not the greatest calamity of our generation. Although the response to it has made it into arguably the greatest calamity of our generation. But, it was going to happen because I didn't really change my opinions about anything during COVID. I had been an advocate for holistic and alternative medicine for decades, and a skeptic about various medical orthodoxies for decades. And all of a sudden, the things that I was saying that used to gain nods of approval from progressives were anathema. And all of a sudden they became anti-Semitism and white supremacy and all this stuff. And all of a sudden I was a Trumper. It was pretty shocking but also very revelatory about human nature and about the people in my sphere, to see who joins the pile-on, who keeps their distance and maybe supports me privately. But of course, I'm not going to speak up because I don't want to be publicly associated with you, and then who actually takes the risk to go against the mob. So yeah, that was, I could talk more about exactly what I was saying during that time, but it was quite a watershed for me. That my career is very different than it was 3 years ago. I'm not part of the discourse anymore. Part of the intelligentsia in a way, not part of the conversation, and no longer invited to a lot of the conferences and venues that I had been. And so it's a bit of a and this I think is true for a lot of people, that COVID was a watershed or a crossroads that shook them loose from the direction that they had been headed in, and maybe had been stuck in a rut and trapped by their lives. And here was an interruption, kind of like a intervention in an addict's life. Because in a way, I was kind of addicted to the career that I had had. I didn't feel like I had a lot of power to change my course. And so I think, actually, I think one reason why people were so acquiescent to the lockdowns was because on some level they wanted a break. They wanted an interruption. They wanted that feeling everything is different now. And so, yeah, I hope I'm not going on too long, but
No.
the pandemic operated on many levels, socially, psychologically, and I think I'm not alone in still trying to navigate the new territory that it has landed me in.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and please don't feel rushed. We have all the time you need, and I feel like authority and the institution, the educational institution, it was easy to maybe early before 2020 to maybe be swayed by that consensus. But it was very quickly revealed that consensus was merely political and not intellectually authoritative. Maybe that's just my observation, but what was that like when you sort of had the realization that the folks that used to value your opinions and your thoughts now had this sort of judge a book by its cover take on you that shut down any conversation?
Yeah, that was the question that I had. I was like, what is going on here? Some force is at work that is more primal than the reasonable disagreements and logical arguments. I mean, I was like, what is this primal force at work here? And that is what I ended up writing about. That got me. I mean, I was already kind of in hot water with the coronation, which I wrote at the very beginning of the pandemic, when a lot of people hadn't really made up their minds yet. So at that point, it was okay to question things that became, party dogma just a few months later. So I kind of squeaked by with that one. But when I saw the groupthink and the mob mentality and the hysteria and people's like instantaneous willingness to fall into lockstep with whatever they perceived the dominant narrative to be, or whatever they perceived the social agreement to be, I was like, I started to look into the work of a philosopher, René Girard, who wrote about sacrificial violence and scapegoating and the process by which social minorities are dehumanized, scapegoated, and in former times even ritually sacrificed. And that wasn't even that long ago. Those are some of the forces that generated the pogroms against the Jews and the Holocaust. You dispel social tensions by directing them onto a scapegoat, dehumanized subclass,
right? And
murder them, literally or figuratively. And I saw that was starting to happen to the unvaccinated. They were having associations of being unclean, of being just horrible people, and then being ostracized through social and legal mechanisms. And I wrote a whole long series of essays about that. And those are the ones that really got me into trouble. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting, it seems like the conspiracy theory community, if we can even call ourselves a community, when I was introduced to this whole worldview, it was very much a left-leaning orientation. Bush was in office, 9/11 had just taken place, people were going against the system, and that system was, for the most part, neocon, right? And I grew up at a time when, Bernie Sanders kind of stole our hearts and said, yeah, we're going to really do something different this time. And the crushing blow to see, him kind of just be replaced overnight, really for no reason other than the the superseding agenda that was clearly behind it the whole time. So
without him even putting up a fight.
Right. Yeah. And
just
so go ahead.
Bent over. Yeah.
Yeah. So the disillusionment occurred, more than once for me. So I was a little bit embarrassed to admit, like, I kind of got swept up in the Trumper thing, and thinking, maybe this guy really is different. Look at how the media is talking crap about him consistently. Maybe he's onto something. But even him, with the what do they call it, warp speed plan, he fed right into that overarching agenda, and you start to realize that it's not left versus right, it's might versus the meager in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Although the neocons didn't disappear. I mean, they are in the Biden administration right now.
Oh yeah.
And in the think tanks and in the elite institutions in the media. So it's not necessarily that, and I know you know this, but it's not, for the listeners who might be paying attention, it's not that the neocons were displaced. And it's kind of what happened is that the right morphed into the left. And what we're really looking at is authoritarianism. So when we were resisting the Bush administration and the Bush wars, then we had a natural alignment with his political opponents, who might have posed as being anti-war, but they're the same. I mean, the same authoritarians are in power today as were in power during it's just like a different faction of the same party, actually.
Right.
So I think it's really the realignment. I mean, there is a realignment happening right now. And it is, instead of right-left, it's more authoritarian and anti-authoritarian. So it kind of unites classic libertarians with anarchists, which in the past defined the left and the right. And on some issues, originally the words right and left were about the politicians on the different sides of the aisle in I think it was the French Assembly post-French Revolution. Like the words originated as to indicate political alignments, not necessarily ideologies. And the left were the ones who wanted to push the revolution even further. They were more radical. But basically what I'm saying is that the left is whatever the people who call themselves the left say the left is. Right. And that means that if people who call themselves the left are adopting positions that have traditionally been right-wing, such as cheerleading the big corporations, big tech, big pharma, big agriculture, such as revering the intelligence agencies, pushing for more military adventures and more armaments, like all that stuff, like supporting the agenda of Wall Street. Right. That's what the so-called progressives and liberals are doing today. Right. And it's like, newsflash, you are not actually liberals. You are conservatives. Right. I mean, you are right-wingers, and you just, have branded yourself as liberal. And that's not 100% true because, like in terms of like race issues, immigration, abortion, like there are certain issues in which the traditional alignments still hold. But it's all mixed up right now. And I'm like you, I identify, less and less with any traditional political category.
Yeah, it's like trying to find the left or right side of a carousel. It's constantly spinning, there really is no sides of it. But when it comes to this situation we're in, with this left really just being the authoritarian, they seem to have retained some of the maybe less critically thinking, who are swept up in this movement that you've written a lot about, and I really want to spend more time talking about the environment than the pandemic, because we're sort of hopefully past that for now, unless they come up with another excuse.
No, we're past it, and they're not going to be able to do that again. Nobody gives a shit anymore.
Right.
You know, they try to unveil, Omicron or Kraken. No one cares. No one's getting boosted. Even if like they won't admit, like the general public and the professional classes, they won't admit that they were wrong. They never will. But the enthusiasm is gone and the scare factor is gone. And the elites who are trying to manufacture social crisis in order to further their totalitarian agenda are going to have to find something else.
Well, and it seems like they're shifting it towards this so-called global crisis. And I know you've spent a lot of time looking into this subject. You've talked about this topic of human society and civilization's relationship with the environment in several of your books. And I think this kind of wraps into an episode I just released with a gentleman named Tom Bluewolf, who spoke to me about the colonial mindset and how this sort of agriculture has diverged us from this organic, natural relationship we once had with nature into this really sort of parasitic relationship with nature. What do you think about that? And
yeah,
maybe we can.
I have definitely looked into that line of thinking. Starting with years ago, I was reading Daniel Quinn and Derek Jensen and John Zerzan, like kind of radical anti-civilization thinkers who argued that agriculture was a huge error and set the stage for all other forms of exploitation. First we exploit the land, we domesticate the animals, and eventually we do it to ourselves and everything. And I think there's another way to look at agriculture, though, as a kind of a coevolution and a symbiosis. All animals change their environment. They change the ecosystem that they are in. And ultimately, that's what agriculture is. And I think the problem is really the industrial model of agriculture and the mindset that holds us separate from nature, that thinks of nature as just a bunch of stuff, a bunch of resources to exploit, and soil as just a bunch of chemistry on the ground, but not something alive and not something that's really part of ourselves. So my environmental writings are all based on the idea, first, that we are inseparable from nature, and secondly, that we are not the only intelligence on this earth and not the only consciousness on this earth, and that our thriving requires deep, intimate relations with all the rest of life, such as soil and water and forests and insects and all the plants and animals. And when we do that, we will ourselves become more alive, even if you can't measure that so much in terms of, total calories per hectare or something like that, or in terms of GDP. But it's the sense that when you look at a denuded landscape or a devastated ecosystem or a giant strip mine or quarry, something hurts inside. Like when we lay waste to nature, we create an inner wasteland too. And that I want to I wrote a book on climate, actually, and part of my argument was we have to stop arguing for we have to change or we're going to perish. We have to tap into our love of nature and to understand it as an organism, to understand the planet as an organism, to diffuse this. Again, it's a kind of a hysteria that tries to focus all of the blame for the current ecological situation on one thing, which is carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases. It's the same mindset, actually, as the pandemic, where we have 50 years of declining health, autoimmunity, depression, addiction, anxiety, allergies, like obesity, right? Over the course of my lifetime, chronic disease rates have gone from like 3% to 50%. And we don't know what to do about that. There's no easily identifiable enemy to attack. There's not some quantity or some bad guy that we can blame. But there's this tremendous anxiety and a feeling something's really wrong here. And now COVID-19 comes along, SARS-CoV-2 or whatever, and everybody is so eager to focus their energy on the culprit with this kind of irrational, unconscious belief that if only we can control this disease, we'll all be healthy again. So same thing like with climate change. Like I do think that the climate is spinning out of control. All kinds of extreme events, flooding and droughts and heat and cold and disrupted weather patterns. And boy, wouldn't that be nice if we could affix all the blame onto one thing, the one thing that happens to be easily measurable and easily monetizable, and that fits in very well with certain political and economic agendas, you know? And we can create carbon markets and derivatives based on those and investment opportunities. Wouldn't it be nice if we could solve all the problems, all the ecosystem degradation with that one thing? No, the cause of the climate crisis is the destruction of the organs of the living being we call Earth. The destruction of the forests, of the soil, of the water, of the whales, of the fish, of the estuaries, of the seagrass meadows, of the wetlands. You damage all your organs, and yeah, your body temperature is going to fluctuate. You're going to get thirsty. You're going to get bloated. I mean, all kinds of things are going to happen. Same thing, like you cut down the forests, you drain the wetlands, and the water no longer soaks into the earth, and it runs off, and there's your flood, and then it's gone, and it's not available to be pulled up by the plants to be transpired into the atmosphere to generate the rainy season. Now you have a drought, and it's because you've cut down the forests. It's because you've developed the wetlands. It's because you've destroyed the soil. It's because you've removed the apex predators that keep the ecosystem healthy. But you don't have to blame any of those things. You can blame some global quantity and install some solar panels on your roof and imagine that you are solving the problem. So sorry if I'm being a little bit vehement about this, but I'm an environmentalist, you know, like I love life. I love this earth. And it's not like I'm getting a paycheck from ExxonMobil to say these things. I want to actually devote this love that is at the bottom of the environmental movement towards solutions that actually work, you know? Because they're being co-opted. They're being diverted onto these techno fixes that could cause a lot more harm than, I mean, they are causing more harm than good in the case of like the electric economy and stuff, and the lithium mining and the nickel mining and the cobalt and the rare earths and the silver. I mean, horrible what's being done in the name of saving the planet.
Right. We put ourselves in a position where we create a problem and then another problem in effort to create a solution, which never gets to the root cause of the original problem. It just expands the problems into this net that all goes back to this cognitive dissonance. And you know, it's easy to maybe blame, let's say, religion or government, but there is something psychologically different about human beings who live in a sort of civilization as we know it in the modern world, and people who live in a very rural, maybe even indigenous situation where their life is inextricably connected to their immediate environment, right? We've separated ourselves enough. We've put enough layers between ourselves and the dirt and the trees and the animals to where now we have this sort of this itch inside of us that needs to be scratched, and we scratch it by, you know, this self-destructive impulse. And I wonder if there's something philosophically or psychologically you've identified specifically that may be underlying this problem.
I think partly it's just what you said, just the distancing. You know, if we are people of the land and really connected to place and living in a local economy, then if we're engaging in destructive practices, we'll see them. We'll see the results. But when you go to the store to purchase your new iPhone or, you know, order it online, you don't see the devastation that its production causes. So partly this is just a matter of distancing. It's not only, though, a physical and technological distancing. It's also an ideological distancing, which I referred to earlier when I talked about a mindset that sees the earth in terms of resources and commodities and not as a living being. Like once you adopt that worldview, then, who cares what happens to the Amazon? We can create a technological replacement for the Amazon. We can build carbon sucking machines to suck the carbon out of the air and spray reflective particles into the atmosphere, and we can engineer the whole earth. It's because why not? Like, why should we extend compassion towards something that we don't even really need necessarily, if we can, create virtual reality simulations of everything that we've destroyed? And that's why I really took some words from a Kogi, an indigenous person from Colombia, in the Kogi nation, who said, he was talking about the development, quote unquote. I mean, even that word, what does that really mean? Development, but the development of coastal wetlands in Colombia. Mm. And he said, if you knew she could feel, you would stop. If you knew she could feel, you would stop. And I thought, yeah, like any time that we commit violence against somebody, it is facilitated by a story that first reduces them. With a human, it dehumanizes them. Like if you have dehumanized somebody into the status of an enemy or like some subhuman racial category or something, then you feel at liberty to exploit them or to abuse them or destroy them. And the same thing with nature. If we see it as less than sacred and less than conscious and less than a being, a beautiful, precious being that actually feels what we're doing to it, then it's a lot easier to harm it. Just as if you objectify women, it's a lot easier to do them harm than if you're really like tuned into what is she feeling right now. Like then it's pretty hard. If you're tuned into that, then her pain is your pain. And so I think the Kogi really identified what has to happen for us to, as a civilization, relate to this earth in a different way. We have to accept her as a being and learn to and tune in to what this being is feeling. And it starts with that idea. Yeah, Earth is a being, and maybe it doesn't start with an idea. Maybe it starts with experiences that people have these experiences sometimes just spontaneously in nature or through psychedelics or in any number of ways. But that is the core of the shift in our relationship to Earth.
Mm. Right. And I guess scholars or academics would describe that as mythic consciousness, the idea that, everything around us is living and long ago, people actually thought that way. They thought the mountain was a being with a life. Now we think of a mountain as a pile of rocks that some guy can climb up to the top of and plant a flag on, right? And I'm sure that this Kogi elder you described would disagree with that as well, and I do too. I think we need to bring the mythic conscious back into common sense, and maybe that common sense will come back to the people, because we have this instinct or impulse as modern thinkers to categorize everything. And I think this is a byproduct of that same civilization that we're a part of, this sort of classification of all the living beings until they become meaningless, right? They're just finite points in a web. They're not, we don't think of the web anymore. We think of, it's like the forest for the trees, that old cliche.
Yeah. And right, when we categorize them, then they become generic examples of a category and not unique, precious individuals. So that is part. It's not, and I'm not saying we should never name things, but reducing them to generic examples of a category is kind of like the precursor to reducing the earth into standardized commodities. And that's really what industry does. Industry depends on standardization and uniformity of products and processes. And I'm not saying that we should have no industry and make everything by handcraft. I think all of our gifts as human beings, all of our capacities are here for a reason. But I can say that the industrial model of production and of thought has exceeded its proper domain. And we need to start asking the question, what parts of life do we want to standardize and industrialize and automate and quantify? And what parts of life actually should remain in the realm of the intimate and the relational and the qualitative? And that's closely related to the question of how far should money extend into human interaction? Because it has encroached farther and farther into our relationships, and that's a whole other domain that I've thought a lot about. But that's the question. It's not like, okay, industry or standardization or categorization or naming is the sin, and we have to wipe it clean and go back to a time where we didn't have agriculture, didn't have nouns. It's to bring consciousness and choice to how and when we use these tools. That's called maturity. To bring into conscious choice that which we had been unconsciously doing, and then to thereby put order to our world. I choose this, I choose not that.
Yeah. You got my mind racing now on where we need to get rid of industry and standardization. I would say agriculture, right? Because we get rid of these big farms and you create the need for smaller farms, and we can give all of these homeless people a job at the very least picking fruit. It's a very simple solution, it seems, but I'm sure it would take a lot. But I've worked at farmers markets, and I've seen how that can bring a community together. And if more people had a garden and a farm in their neighborhood, maybe there wouldn't be as many trucks on the road, and all of these things can start to even out, right? We're not saying, truckers are bad. And I think, industry still does serve a purpose. But if we could do that local shift of, instead of depending on Mexico for all of our produce and all of these other places for corn and soy just coming from one place, you've driven through the Midwest, you'll see it's all soy or it's all corn or it's all who knows what, but it's monocropped. And that's leading to this incredibly precarious situation. I mean, how does that have an effect on our climate? Have you looked into monocrop?
Yeah. No, I think you're right, though. I think that agriculture is a pretty good place to start with deindustrialization, because after all, that's kind of where it got started. The first industrial model were the ancient mass societies like Egypt, where they built huge machines out of human parts, essentially, and began this process of standardization. Life gets a lot richer when we participate in the production of food, and where we know the people who are producing our food and forge those relationships, and our diet gets better actually as well, and the food tastes better, and everything is better that way. And maybe it takes more labor, to plant your own garden takes a few hours a week, whereas the amount of food you get in those few hours a week, it's probably $10 or $20 worth of food a week at most. So you're only paying yourself $5, $6, $7 an hour by spending all that time in the garden. It's not worth it, is it? By that kind of arithmetic, it's not worth it. It's less efficient. But that's the thing, is efficiency our God? Is the quality of life a function of more of something you can measure? Because when you grow your own food or share it with your neighbors, you're getting something that you cannot measure. Like that, just like, for example, the experience of having your hands in the soil, that feeling of connection to a place. You can't buy that with money. So as for climate change, you asked that, an awful lot of what, okay, so if you take just the carbon lens, you probably know that regenerative practices can sequester huge amounts of carbon in the soil. I did a calculation in my book and basically calculated that if we converted something like half of the world's agricultural lands to regenerative practices, we could offset all carbon emissions. But I don't really take the carbon lens. And I think that the effects of good land stewardship are much more powerful when you look at it in terms of water and not carbon. And I think if there is a substance, one thing that we should affix, that we should direct most of our attention to, and I don't think that there's a one thing, but if there were, it would be water. That's the most sacred of all the substances on Earth. So through the water lens, proper land stewardship is tremendously beneficial, because I mentioned it before, like the rain is able to penetrate into the soil and reach the aquifers, and the aquifers rise and springs flow, and trees can draw on that water, and they put it back into the atmosphere, and it condenses. And when it does so, it releases heat, by the way, out into space. So even like plants cool the earth, but it also then creates the rains, and it creates a more moderate climate, and you don't have the floods and the droughts. I spoke at an event in Kansas a few months ago, last year it was, and the farmer was describing he did what are they called, infiltration tests on his soil, and compared conventionally farmed soil before he had a chance to like improve it and heal it, and it took I think it was 45 minutes for 1 inch of water to soak in. And then after he had improved the soil and made it healthy, which takes years or even decades, it took 45 seconds.
Wow.
45 minutes, I mean, you're going to have like sheets of water on top of the soil. Flooding. And it's going to evaporate quickly or run off. And then you're going to have like that cracked, parched earth, and it never soaks in. And so the springs go dry and the wells go dry. And this is happening all over the Midwest. Like the well that Grandpa dug is dry now. You have to dig a deeper one and a deeper one and a deeper one. And meanwhile, they're getting poisoned by agricultural chemicals, and you can't even drink the water from your own well. And all of that can be reversed with proper soil stewardship. And that's, I mean, we could go into more detail about that, but it's really flood and drought that deliver the biggest impact to human beings when you're talking about climate. It's not temperature so much.
Right. Well, and it seems like they use temperature and carbon to keep people off of the actual problem in order to belay the situation and, fund whatever horse shit, excuse my language, that they want to make a couple dollars off of it. In this case, it seems like pollution and polluting the water and polluting the soil with chemicals is the real issue, but they don't use that word, because now, corporations are liable. Who's liable? Well, we have the U.S. military, the number one polluter, I think, in the world, if not just this country. And the whole military industrial complex bleeds into this agricultural system too, in many ways. And I think that's where, when you start to parse a lot of this through, you realize, and I've heard you say this before, that our society is anti-life. And I think it's because maybe these well-intending people are taking the wrong approach, and they've invested so much into this wrong approach that now they're either too have too much hubris to admit it, or they just can't admit it because they'd lose everything they've worked for.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the economic aspect is very important. I do think about that some, but I think more important is just the basic ideology, the basic belief systems about how the world works and what's alive and what isn't. And, if you take for granted the basic concept that the Earth is a gigantic machine with all of these chemical and physical geological processes, then you're going to treat it like a machine. If you have a perception that Earth is not alive, then you're going to treat it as not alive. Our perceptions are very powerful. The way that we see things and the way that we treat things becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if we see the Earth as dead and we relate to it as dead, then it's going to end up being dead. So I think that now that mindset is also very profitable, because it facilitates the extraction of resources and the dumping of wastes and so forth, if you don't think that she can feel. So it's also very profitable, and it's true that people tend to be attracted to the beliefs that are convenient for them to believe, that coincide with their self-interest. So I think that, yes, there's an alignment between powerful corporate interests and a worldview that holds the Earth as not alive and conscious and sacred. However, ultimately, it's not actually in anybody's interest. Like I say, it seems like, oh, you're profiting from that, right? Well, the corporation is profiting from it, but the corporation is made up of people. And ultimately, yeah, you might get a really high salary for, presiding over a corporation that ruins land. But are you really happy doing that? Are you fulfilled doing that? Do you believe in what you're doing? Are you proud of your contribution to this Earth? And a lot of people are waking up to the realization that it's not really in my interest to do this. There's a new consciousness awakening everywhere, including in the corporations, including in the military, including in high political circles. And these people, many of them have had a real change of heart and a shift in consciousness. And they then feel trapped in the institutions that they preside over. And they realize that they're not actually that powerful. They were only powerful as administrators, as functionaries of a system. But when they want to try to change the system, they're not powerful. They're no more powerful than anybody else. Right. Well, they're infinitely divinely powerful too, but their power, the power of a corporate executive or a senator, or a president, is defined and created and permitted by the system that they are in. And if they deviate too far from the requirements of that job description, they will be ejected. And somebody new will come in who's more compliant. And so a lot of our so-called leaders are actually in a state of turmoil right now. They want to do something different, and they don't know how to begin. And they show up in Congress every day, and they're like, this is crazy, but I can't let anyone know that I think that. I mean, I know for a fact that there are governors and Congress people who are sitting in ayahuasca circles. Like this. But how would you know that? It could be even the case, and I know this isn't true, but it could be that every single person in Congress secretly has like this other life, but nobody dares show it. No one dares admit it. And this is kind of the situation on Earth right now, that nobody believes in the system that almost everybody pretends to believe in. It is an appearance of unanimity, an appearance of agreement, but it's not actually agreement.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I mean, that is fascinating. A lot of people, at least in this community, speculate on the secret lives of Congress people and senators, and it's usually not as polite as ayahuasca circles.
Oh no, I mean,
that's
sure,
their
a lot
speculations, at least.
Yeah. No, I mean, surely some of them are, attending satanic rituals too. But right. That's another, like, that particular conspiracy theory that, there is, again, it's like there is one thing to blame for everything, one key to solving everything, to solving every problem. It's the same mindset as it's a virus
right.
that's making everybody sick in the world, or it's CO2. Like, it's the Illuminati. Like, it simplifies things in a way that disturbs me.
I love that you said that. That's the medicine that we need more of. And I know I try to keep it balanced on this show, but yeah, there's been guests on this show who could use that advice. And I've heard you say that, the elites are more like puppets of the system than puppet masters themselves in some ways. And you just kind of described that dilemma that some of our maybe awakened peers in those positions are feeling. But yeah, let's hope that they can turn the tide. Do you think that the system, is this sort of mind of its own in a way, like a being in itself, almost like how some esotericists describe an egregore, where it is. Okay. Yeah, it's an egregore. It is our system, and I would even call it our mythology, the mythology of separation, the separate self in a world of other, separate from nature, the soul separate from the flesh, this whole paradigm of separation. And all the systems on top of it, they are together a being that has contained much of humanity for a long time. We've had experiences within that story, and we've developed capacities within it, for good and for ill. And I believe that particular system and story is nearing the end of its lifetime. And we are going to transition into something else. And it might be a rocky transition, and there's no guarantee that we'll make it through. But the see, this is, I guess it might be a little bit subtle here, but, and I'll say at the beginning, like, I do fully accept that, human trafficking rings and so forth penetrate much, much higher into the global elites than we are let on to know. Okay, I accept that. But the question for me is there like a central controller of everything? Everything is happening, everything's planned out. And I think that it's kind of intellectually convenient or satisfying to believe that, because it eliminates the mystery and the uncertainty and almost the terror of a world that does not have intelligence imposed on it from the outside, but that is itself intelligent. So when events
coagulate around a certain narrative. Is that because they are being planned out and executed according to that narrative? Or could it be through the action of synchronicity? Like when, and the origin of our current concept of synchronicity was Carl Jung, who noticed things like, he'd be doing a psychoanalytic session with a patient, and the patient would be telling him about a dream of ancient Egypt where they wore these scarabs, and then like a scarab beetle like flies into the window in New York City or something, like a completely okay, so how do you explain that? Was there like some conspiracy to send that beetle just at the time that guy was having that? No, it's that the world and its events are not just like this random thing. There is an intelligence that cooperates with human beliefs and human choices and human states of being. So it's very hard to disentangle a conscious conspiracy with the crystallization of events around a state of consciousness and a narrative. It's hard to disentangle them, and I do think that there are conspiracies. I think that 9/11 was, I don't know which of the. There's something really fishy about it. The Kennedy assassinations. A lot of the conspiracies are well documented. COINTELPRO, the infiltration of environmental organizations and the anti-globalism movement and the civil rights movement. It used to be the left that was indignant about conspiracies because it was like the FBI and the CIA destroying their movements again and again and again. Like these things happened, Operation Mockingbird. They're well documented. Anyway, I just want to. I'm not sure if I could make my point clear here, but that it's this. Human beings are not the sole source of order, organization, and intelligence in the world. And so when I say the elites are puppets, even the highest elites, they are puppets of what you were saying, like this system that is a being unto itself, this story, which comes with a set of archetypes too. It's a mythology that is the puppet master, and its systems are the puppet master. And you take somebody and you put them in a different setting, and they behave completely differently. And in a way, all of us are administrators of this system. We're all the Illuminati in some sense, like doing things that we would not do in another setting, like such as always trying to get the best deal. When you go online to buy something and you compare prices and you choose based on price, like you're not thinking of, well, the person producing this is a human being and maybe I should buy the more expensive one so that they can make a decent profit and support their family. Like that's usually not the way that we think. When you're in, it's like I give the example of musical chairs. You take it like the game where there's maybe say 100 people and 95 chairs, and when the music stops, everyone scrambles for a chair, and whoever doesn't get a chair, they're out. And I say, imagine if you had a game of musical chairs, and the consequence of not getting a chair, it's not only that you are out of the game. Let's say you then have to choose between food and medical care, and you lose your house and your kid. Let's make the game interesting. Okay, let's make there be real consequences. Well, then you look at how people behave, and there's a lot of pushing and shoving, and the strongest and the quickest get the chairs, and the disadvantaged, they're shit out of luck. And you look at that and you're like, God, human nature, it's terrible. But is that human nature? Or is that the response to the rules of the game? What happens if you have 100 people and 100 chairs? Then you have very different behavior. maybe you still have some competition and some trading because all the chairs are different and everybody's butt is different. And, I'd like a high chair and you like a low chair, and there's still an economy. I mean, I developed this metaphor to explain the financial system, where there's always more debt than there is money. So we are always in excessive competition beyond what is natural. We're in an artificially scarce environment. So that's just like one example of how human nature changes depending on the context that we are in, and how we are all puppets in a way of a system that we're just dimly conscious of, but that is losing its grip.
Yeah, I hope so, because this artificial scarcity, I mean, it has serious effects even on people who are well-meaning. I mean, I had a brick thrown through my car a month ago, and if this person maybe was on the right side of this scarcity, they wouldn't have felt the need to have this altercation with me, right? This altered playing field that we're all on right now due to that artificial scarcity. It causes people to treat each other in a very dark way, me versus them, us versus them. Even it's has very real effects, but a lot of it gets swept under the rug, and people are like, well, yeah, that's a bad neighborhood, or oh yeah, there's a lot of homeless people there, and you kind of just shrug these things off and do your best to avoid them. But when you look at the people who are actually trying to mitigate those situations, help the homeless or defend and lock up criminals, defend people and lock up criminals, they tend to exacerbate the problem more than they do solve it. And I think, this has a lot to do with what you just described more than it does anything else. And that's why a lot of these attempts to mediate a situation end up making things worse.
Yeah, because we're always attacking the symptom
Right.
and not the cause,
Right.
And sometimes you have to deal with symptoms, but if you only attack the symptom and never look at the cause, then you will be in a state of endless war. If you think that the cause of terrorism is terrorists and you just constantly are trying to drone the terrorists and kill the terrorists, you're going to get crop after crop of terrorists. If you think that the cause of crime is criminals, and you never look beyond that, then you're never going to change the conditions that breed crime. And the antidote to that is first to ask, what would it take for me to be a criminal? What would it take for me to be an illegal immigrant? What would it take? What would be those conditions, say, that would prompt me to uproot my entire life and take enormous risks, and risk being trafficked and be away from my children and my family and go with no security to work at hard labor in another country? What would those conditions have to be? And then the next question is, what can I do to change those conditions? If I don't want there to be crime or, illegal migration or something like that, how can I be part of a change of conditions and not have to always be fighting the symptom and building walls and building prisons and waging wars? We can do better than this.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope we can move past the us versus them. It seems to stem from, at least from what I've researched, in the intellectual world, Hegel, and this guy, George Hegel, who inspired a lot of what became the fascists that, destroyed Europe in a lot of ways. And I wonder if that still exists in the philosophy of the elite, this sort of state is superior to all. We make the state the god of the people, and that's how we'll rule. I mean, that was a different aspect of Hegel's philosophy, but it seems to have informed a lot of the antagonists that we're describing throughout this conversation, this philosophy born out of Germany there.
Yeah. I mean, that, that would be getting into some pretty heavy philosophy, Hegel.
Yeah.
I generally don't like to blame things on any particular philosopher.
I sense that, yeah. Well, and I don't like to blame things either. I feel like I'm just kind of cornering myself into that because I don't know any other way to broach the topic with you. But yeah, I would like to know your thoughts on that.
Philosophers, they give voice to emerging ideas of their time. And I guess when Hegel was working, that was like the full flush of the nation state that had emerged fairly recently, and it was new. The nation state really only emerged as a concept maybe in the 16th century. And I think that is another story that is becoming infirm and reaching the end of its lifespan as like the primary locus of human organization, the dominant level of organization. I think that in a healthy planet, we would transition to communities and bioregions. And it wouldn't be that nations, peoples, cultures on a bigger level would disappear. It just wouldn't be the primary unit of organization. I think that philosophers who took it for granted as the highest expression of civilization were just voicing the zeitgeist.
Right. Yeah, that's important to keep in mind. We can't blame any individuals. This is sort of definitely a trope amongst conspiracy theories. Try to pin it all on one person, and yeah, it ends up being ends up turning more people off to this notion, which is important, in a lot of ways. I think too many people go with the status quo and they don't think about, where the world can be a better place. And maybe that's meant to be. I mean, have you heard the concept of NPC? Do you put much thought into that concept? It seems to be popular these days. And I wonder if there's a sort of philosophical it's built in philosophically to humans. I mean, it seems like it could have been NPCs in the past. They were just, people who didn't do much, What do you think about NPCs?
Well, I appreciate the metaphor, having grown up playing Dungeons and Dragons, version 1, by the way. However, it just feels like a little bit kind of contemptuous of others, like people have lives. People have each person is an entire universe unto themselves, and they're living out their story, and it is meaningful to them, and in some sense, necessary for the evolution of all of humanity. Every story must be told. Every play must be acted out. Every storyline, every experience must be had by somebody. And but yeah, like, a lot of people are mindless of the ways that the system and its puppets, the elites, control society. But I think everybody is asleep to some things and aware of other things. I don't think that I could put it this way. Yes, the world is divided between the two types of people, the asleep and the awakened. And the way you can tell which category somebody is in is that if you think that there are just two types of people in the world, the asleep and the awakened, then you are one of the asleep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, I think that it is contemptuous, and that's why I try to raise the point on this show about NPCs and get different opinions, because everybody's special, but then again, nobody's special, right? I mean, everybody's special and nobody's special at the same time. Like,
I do this sometimes. Like I'll be at the airport or something, and I'll look at the employee at Sbarro or Chick-fil-A or something like that, and usually it's a kind of glum, wooden-looking person, usually somewhat overweight, looking kind of depressed, like. And I'm like, I'll look at that person and I will hit the rewind button to the point when they were 1 or 2 or 6 months old, and the cutest little thing with an expectation of a magical experience in this world, and all of the curiosity of a baby, and all of the unguarded openness of a baby. And I mean, any baby, you can almost not love a baby. And I think, what happened to this person? That their dreams were shattered, that their spirit was brutalized, that they were like, that all of their hopes and their dreams of a child, and what am I going to do when I grow up, and what am I going to be? And now they're like 36 years old working at Sbarro. Like, I'm like, when I go into that, I'm like, hey, brother, I'm sorry. And I will do what I can to create a different kind of world. But I think that if we do not cultivate the vision, the gaze of my brother, my sister, we're not actually going to be able to create a better world. We're going to be missing something. And that dismissal of others, that writing off of other people, that contempt will show up in everything that we create. And we will create some other version of what we already have. We need to create from a consciousness of universal brotherhood of man, of not just as a spiritual ideology, but of actual practice of seeing that you are a child of God, as I am.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I'm not alone in saying that I probably dismiss people, and yeah, I'm sure we all have, but it's something.
Yeah, it's a habit that we've been inculcated with, and together maybe we can awaken from it.
Well, yeah, and it starts with recognizing it, right? And not being ashamed of it, because everyone has felt that in the inverse too. I mean, other people have dismissed anyone at some point in your life, listeners, yourself, Charles, me. Speaking of which, I'm so fascinated by your story and how you started at Yale, because I have this massive prejudice against Yale growing up in this area, and just sort of feeling like they're kind of a pariah on the town. And there's so many amazing things that have been accomplished by that school. Don't get me wrong, I don't negate that. But I do want to know, what your experience was like there, because you were in Yale at a sort of different time period than the time period I'm researching. And I've talked to other Yale graduates on this show, and their experiences have varied quite a ton, because it is a very segmented school. Like, if you're in the law school, you're in the law school. You don't, fraternize with the people in the drama school. At least that's what the folks in the drama school told me. But anyways, what was your experience like there? I mean,
well, I was there as an undergraduate. And so this was like the late 80s, before academia became so ideological. And I was miserable at Yale for most of my time there. I felt very alienated, never really fit in, never really I was always half-hearted about succeeding there, because I was like, I was like, hold on, do you really care about grades? Is this really like the whole value system? I didn't fully buy into it. Um, I enjoyed my classes for the most part. Studied mathematics and philosophy, and I was, I liked my classes. Yeah, I'll say that. But I had other priorities, like social needs that were not being met. I was very lonely. I didn't have a lot of friends until finally, like my senior year. Also, I was like really kind of young and immature. I started when I was 17, and I was like socially and I reached puberty late, so I was like, kind of the equivalent of a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old when I entered in terms of like physical development. I was like this adolescent, and finally by my senior year, I got, really deep in with I was on the track team and the cross country team, and that provided a lot of joy for me. But I basically couldn't wait to get out of there. And, from there, I just totally left not only academia, but the United States of America too.
Wow.
I just went off to Taiwan and spent the next 9 years there.
And you spent some time in your childhood in Taiwan, correct?
No, I took a semester off and went to Taiwan, but no, no.
No? Okay.
No.
That was your first time visiting Taiwan then?
I visited in my sophomore year, and then when I graduated, I went back.
Wow.
And stayed for 9 years.
Wow. Okay. Well, tell me about that. I'd love to know about that. It seems like that would be a very turbulent place to be at the time, right? I mean, what was Taiwan like back then? Oh,
it was awesome.
Yeah,
I loved it.
Tell us.
I mean, it was like really polluted and stuff, but when I first got there, it was still under martial law, as a vestige of the war against the Chinese communists, right. In 1940s. But there was so much freedom there. Like you could, like going into business could be as simple as like like laying out a blanket and selling stuff on a sidewalk. like you could pretty much do anything. There was just no red tape or regulation or anything. So it was, I loved that sense of freedom. And people were, I mean, I could talk for hours about Taiwan. It wasn't like the old agrarian culture was still present to some degree. People were coming from almost a different universe. It was very recently modernized. And there were a lot of customs and traditions that were still intact from the old days. And that was fascinating. And I, came into contact with Taoism and Buddhism and Qigong, and Chinese medicine and also like kind of folk Taoism and superstitious thinking and like, things like ghosts were not even like weird. I mean, they were accepted as part of reality by everybody.
Right.
So I really got, had a powerful formative influence on me to step into a worldview that did not share what I had considered to be, universal agreement about what is real. So it helped me step outside of my cultural conditioning and to question everything.
That's wonderful. Yeah, we've had Peter Jenks on the show before, and he's written a book called Occult Thailand. And although that book deals with just Thailand, he described a bunch of different Asian cultures through the book. And yeah, it's fascinating. Some of the lore. One thing that stood out to me was that each city in Thailand has its own like guardian spirit, right? Mm-hmm. Was there any experiences you had with folk Taoism, like anything spooky or maybe informative, like a lesson from somebody, a synchronicity?
Well, my girlfriend and then wife at the time was very afraid of ghosts and had some really spooky experiences that I was only peripherally involved in. But one apartment we lived in, like there were like all these really weird noises, like a light flicking on and off and on and off, like a light switch, um, like all the time. Like, and there were some really spooky things. Like she saw this like man, in our apartment from time to time, who wasn't actually there. Like, when I went out, he wasn't there. Yeah, and in Taiwan, that's like, you're not like crazy if you think that.
Right.
If you like, I once took a taxi ride, and the driver told me about like this really spooky experience he had where he like picked up a woman wearing like wedding clothes, like, all in like red. In Taiwan, you wear red if you're the bride. Like this beautiful wedding garb, but kind of old-fashioned, but beautiful wedding garb, and gave him an address in the old part of town. And it was like the middle of the night. He was kind of like baffled, like, why is somebody taking a taxi to a wedding in the middle of the night? And he got to the address, or where the address should be, but that building didn't exist. There was no address there. And he turned to look back at the back seat, to ask, and the woman was gone. And then he got the heebie-jeebies, So he said he had to go to a Taoist priest to perform an exorcism and, to clear out the bad energy in his taxi cab.
Yeah.
Before he could take more customers, so. I mean, the way he spoke of it, though, was more like, it wasn't like, he wasn't afraid I would think he was weird. Like, it was culturally accepted that kind of thing happens sometimes.
Yeah.
And if your taxi's infested with bed bugs, then you have to go to a fumigator. And if it's infested with a ghost, then you have to go to a Taoist priest. It's like, it was in that category of normality. I don't know if it's still like that there, because as modernity has overtaken the place, along with it comes the worldview of modernity, which does not have a place for, the discarnate spirits of brides who probably died tragically, decades ago. Like that is not part of admissible reality. But I think that we need to start admitting some of these excluded, banished aspects of the human experience. We need to start admitting them back into reality, because if we do not, this planet has no chance. If we don't accept the help of the non-human world, including the allies, the nature spirits, and angels and guides and ETs, and like all of this pantheon of being beyond the human being. And if we don't tap into the capacities that are not recognized by science, especially in the area of healing, then we're basically fighting the enemy on its own turf with their own tools, the tools of force and domination. But there's a lot more than that. And we can participate in miracles of transformation when we open up to the realities that we have excluded.
Yeah, absolutely. I would even suggest that, those ghost encounters and whatnot are something that happens when a culture is declining from its mythic consciousness or its connection with nature. These sort of ghosts start to come about, and if industry sufficiently takes over, people, they tend to, they can't conform that to their worldview anymore, so it fades from reality in a way, which is in a way what I was struggling to word my question as this statement really is what I was trying to say is, when we believe in these things, we give power to their reality, right? It's almost like, not that they're simply beliefs, but by believing in them, we're allowed to engage with that side of the world, that natural, magical side of the world that industry seems to separate us from, or at the very least, maybe this separation causes that. It might not be industry itself, more rather the separation. But yeah, this is all kind of tailing on the topic of the fallacy of human progress. And I'm wondering if we can address this concept, because we kind of talked about it earlier, but there is this notion that we've developed to this advanced state, or we've reached this greatest potential, or we've peaked, and I don't believe that that can be justified anymore, that we're in a state of evolution. It seems like we've devolved from what we used to be.
Yeah, that's part of the what I call the old story, or the story of separation. It as a mythology, it contains a view of the destiny of humanity, where we've come from and where we're going, and why we're here. And in that story, the answer to the question, why are we here and where are we going, was to rise above nature, to dominate the rest of life, to go off into space, to upload our consciousness into computers, that whole technological utopia. And so progress became associated with the advancement of a certain kind of technology and the scientific knowledge that underlies it. And that is a kind of progress, but I see it as more of progress along one axis of development. And there are many, many other axes of development that human beings can explore. So we think of ourselves as very advanced and speak of development as other people copying us and walking the path that we have walked. But as we reach the limits of our particular kind of progress, we've become more and more curious about other ways to develop that other cultures have held. Like, what would a culture be like if it developed the capacities of dreaming to a very high degree, such as maybe the Aborigines of Australia? Like, what if you were raised breathing that all the time, and there were highly developed techniques to access the dream state and to apply it to life? Or what if there's a culture that has developed the technologies of sound and light and vibration, as they say about ancient Atlantis, which had not even developed the wheel yet, but had a very highly developed civilization. There's just so many capacities of the human being that are ignored or pathologized in our current society, that now they're like calling for attention, and it's challenging to develop those because they're not economically rewarded. You might even end up locked in the psych ward for practicing them, but they're becoming more and more necessary in our time.
Yeah, it seems like our mystics were labeled schizophrenics and thrown away in insane asylums in that World War II Industrial Revolution period. And yeah, I think there are people that have been pushed to the fringes whose opinions, whose perspectives can add to that change. But yeah, it seems like efficiency is the overall goal, when if our society was geared towards dreaming the same way we were efficiency, what kind of world would this be? Who knows? Mm-hmm. The Aborigines were certainly a interesting group of people, for sure. Their whole community was centered around that. There's still tribes in Papua New Guinea there's still Aborigines, but there's still, I've heard a story of in Papua New Guinea, there's a tribe fairly isolated. Every morning, the tribe wakes up, they sleep in a sort of group setting, and they all discuss their dreams together. And they talk about, what that person dreamed. And based on, all the dreams that are had that night, that may determine the, agenda of the day and who does what. And that's such a fascinating, rubric to live your life by, the group dream that they're all living in. I wonder if we can extrapolate that to a larger society.
There's a lot to explore, and a lot of us, individually are starting those explorations.
Well, and on that note, what's next for you, Charles? Because you've written quite a few books. Your latest, Coronations, is more of a compilation of essays, right? So what's next for you? Do you have a new book that's in the works, or something that you're thinking about covering next?
No, I'm mostly writing essays now on Substack, and also I'm brewing some short films. Awesome. That I'm just kind of finding collaborators to produce, and I don't know. I'm going to launch a online course, but more of like an activation around parenting, because I've had 4 children, and at this point, kind of learned a lot about how to parent for a more beautiful world. So. Yeah, I'm a little bit, as I said before, after COVID, I'm a little bit at a crossroads right now, and just not really sure exactly what my next direction will be.
Right. Yeah, well, we hope we can support you in your endeavors with this show, and maybe even ingratiate you into this community of people who are definitely on that same situation of not being well understood, but being well-meaning. And Charles, I would love to have you back on to get into the parenting conversation. I am not a parent myself, but I certainly have a lot of questions about that. So folks can go to your website, charleseisenstein.org, and also your Substack. You could just search Substack Charles Eisenstein. I'll put the links for that in the description. Is there anything else you'd like to let the folks know, and maybe final thoughts before we wrap up here?
I don't know. I feel like I've kind of said a lot. I'll just thank you for taking the time to speak with me and share our conversation.
Absolutely. No, the pleasure is mine, and I appreciate you taking the time. I wish you well on this new path, this new journey, because it is a weird situation to be canceled. And I work for Sam Tripoli, and he battles with these people all the time on Twitter and who knows where else about free speech, and that's not your battle. You're on to, I would say, larger ventures. While the fight for free speech is important and it predicates everything that's said, it definitely is only one facet. And I think we need to be setting our sights on the earth and the family. I'm glad to hear that you're going to be doing that. So anyways, Charles, thank you so much for being here. One last question before you go. Does your family think you're crazy for doing everything that you do, writing the books that you write, writing the essays that you write?
Some of them do, and some of them don't. I'm not the only black sheep in the family.
Right on. Well, you're not the only black sheep.
But we all love each other. Our family's very, very, very loving, and ultimately, even if some of us think others are crazy, we still accept each other.
That's awesome. Yeah. That's good to hear. And you're among many black sheeps on this podcast. So welcome to the club, and I wish you the best. And for everyone listening, thank you for tuning in, and immerse yourself in the moment wherever you are in the now.
a little extra terrestrial, trying to stay human in a cesspool of professionals. But I confess too much off of the tongue. All my aunties and my uncles shield the ears of the young. I be saying shit and they don't know where it's coming from. In like 100 years we went Zarbomba from guns. Check the facts, check the Fed, check the stars. Stanley Mines was murked for a water fuel cell car. They each their own, you can stick with your own ways, but eat the rich and drink the motherfucking Kool-Aid. And I can see the red on your lip stain. White skin, blue collar, pure American made. Fuck it, you can keep your blood-soaked heritage and run the soul off the moon-landed narrative. Yeah, my girl thinks that I'm embarrassing. My folks think I'm nuts, but never question the parenting. Stuck in bed, so my boss thinks I'm lazy. Connecting dots, but it's all kinda hazy. I'm on the internet, feeling like I'm Dick Tracy. My pap thinks I'm un-American and shady. Yeah, I'm feeling unhinged lately. Encounters of the fifth kind on the daily. You could tell me that the president's an alien, it wouldn't faze me. My family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, 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 my family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, baby, baby. You might think that I'm off in the deep end. One too many Netflix docs on the weekends. But check the budget for our military defense. Tell me we ain't scared of something not within reason. Steel beams, another 1492. And 9/11 was the red, white, and blue. And you be lit off the floor riding, ain't got a clue. All your dreams just shit on a Rockefeller shoes. Don't believe a damn thing a politician ever said. Ain't one brick left to gold up in the Fed. They still got bricks of cocaine to make crack. Oxy's killing the working class, FDA's whack. Talking like this, got kin talking behind backs. Too much to unpack, so they talk smack. And I'm just trying to converse with my clan, but it ain't fan. So I'm here setting up camp. Stuck in bed, so my boss thinks I'm lazy. Connecting dots, but it's all kinda hazy. I'm on the internet, feeling like I'm Dick Tracy. My pap thinks I'm un-American and shady. Yeah, I'm feeling unhinged lately. Encounters of the fifth kind on the daily. You could tell me that the president's an alien, it wouldn't faze me. My family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, 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 my family thinks I'm crazy. Maybe, 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 just maybe. Stuck in bed, so my boss thinks I'm lazy. Connecting dots, but it's all kinda hazy. I'm on the internet, feeling like I'm Dick Tracy. My pap thinks I'm un-American and shady. I'm feeling unhinged lately. Encounters of the fifth kind on the daily. You could tell me that the president's an alien, it wouldn't faze me. My family thinks I'm crazy. Yeah, I think one thing I've learned is you can't rule anything out. So